This meeting to order. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Board members, staff, guests, and members of the public are reminded the full authority committee meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the authority's website along with the official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and the general public are your own and do not represent the opinions or comments of the full authority or the KCCA Board of Directors. The recorded video of the meeting is not considered the official record of the meeting. The official record of the committee meeting shall consist solely of the minutes approved by the committee and the full authority. So first up is we have the proposed purchasing policy, and Elizabeth, if you want to walk us through this.
Sure. Do it from the podium just because of the length. So the purchasing policy, you can see in your advanced package, I included both the proposed new purchasing policy as well as KCCA's existing purchasing policy. As mentioned in the report, it really is more of a rewrite of the purchasing policy than necessarily an update, but I thought that was necessary to bring it up to date with some of the best management practices out there now. So the proposed policy has much clearer, in my opinion, accountabilities and procedures according to various payment types. So we go right through petty cash, credit card, expense claim forms, as well as a clearer explanation of the different expenditure thresholds. It's clearer and more concise. And what I'm asking from the committee today is any suggested changes or feedback before presenting it to the full authority at the October meeting, where hopefully we can seek approval of this policy. So I wanted to, very similar to the personnel policy, take you through it basically section by section. There's the first three sections, the introduction, purchasing objectives, and MIFIPA, really just simply outline those objectives that all goods and services will be acquired in accordance with applicable legislation and regulation. The purchasing methods, this section provides for guidelines for each one of those purchasing methods that I mentioned, so petty cash, corporate credit card, business expenses, and accounts payable. I think the one thing, big difference from the existing policy is that it would be my recommendation to suggest that we acquire 2 additional credit cards. The authority currently has 1 credit card right now that I hold in my possession and staff sign out as necessary. But what we've run into is locally a number of the big box stores have gone away with their charge accounts, where we used to, all staff had buying privileges. They could go in, buy something, and charge it to the account. They've now moved to where they're expecting each staff person to have a store credit card that's in the Kettle Creek's name. And so that means there could be upwards of 12 of these box credit cards out there, and it wasn't something that I was comfortable with. And really the only 2 staff people that it really impacts is the coordinators, because they're often making purchases at odd hours, outside business hours, and on weekends just because of their work schedules. So it'd be my suggestion to get 2 more credit cards and that they would be signed out to those individuals for their busy season, which would be May 1st to September 30th. And they would follow the checks and balances that are outlined in the policy as well. In terms of the purchasing authorities, again, it goes through those various thresholds. And so under $1,000, basically all approved purchasers would be allowed to make those purchases under $1,000. And this is in keeping with the policies right now. So Joe and I would look at the staff that is coming on and approve them as purchasers for that threshold. From 1,001 to 10,000, you're looking at requirements to have 3 quotes. staff that are allowed to purchase in that category are their permanent employees with approval. And no board approval is required for purchases within that threshold if it has been included and accommodated in the approved budgets, or it's been approved or accommodated within a funding grant. So we wouldn't necessarily be coming back to the board for approval on those purchases if it's something that we can accommodate within our budget, or it's been approved as part of the larger budget. For 10,000 to 50,000, again, we're looking at requirements for 3 quotes. 2 signing authorities can approve purchases in this threshold if, again, it can be accommodated or included in approved budgets or funding grants. Full authority is required if it can't be accommodated in those approved budgets, and a bid process may be used. So it's recommended, it's not necessary, but it's recommended based on the type of purchase that you're making. For 50,000 to 100,000, again, the standard 3 quotes apply. Full authority approval is required, and once you get to the $75,000 threshold, we're looking at a requirement for a public tender process or an RFP process. Over $1,000 requires a public process through RFP or tender process, and just noting that that would be a full advertisements of that bid process, including on bid websites. We've been using more and more the Bidingo types of websites, making sure it's up on our website and those types of things, and board approval is required as well. So the other thing I wanted to mention under these purchasing thresholds, if 3 quotes are not obtained, the purchaser is to evaluate if reissuing the quote or bid process is feasible, and if not, provide rationale to the approval agent. But noting that a decline to respond may be considered as a response in acquiring those 3 quotes. We have included a section in the updated one of direct negotiations. And this is the ability to communicate directly with a vendor for the purpose of obtaining identified goods or services under terms and conditions agreeable to KCCA according to the procedures. And this can only occur under certain circumstances, and those are outlined in the proposal, in the policy as well. So direct negotiations could occur if it was an extension or renewal of the previously board-approved contract. So this might be something like a cell phone contract that's had previously board approval. If we want to move to renew it, then we could directly negotiate with the provider. An emergency is defined in the policy, and we'll get into the definition of emergency further in the policy. Certain circumstances where there's only one market supplier of a unique good or service, a good or service is limited due to market conditions, or it's required for compatibility with existing products, or staff have not been able to find any qualified bid, and where the process did not demonstrate a failure. Those would be the circumstances where we would go to directly negotiate with a vendor or a buyer. And it is noted in the policy as well that direct negotiation shouldn't be used as a mechanism to circumvent the processes outlined in the policy. So it shall not be used to avoid issuing or reissuing a failed bid or quote where it is in the best interest of the authority to solicit bids under the same or a different purchasing mechanism. So just because you couldn't phone out and get 3 bids, if it's a major something that we need to maybe advertise more widely, then we don't circumvent the process by just going to a direct negotiation. We would maybe bump it up to go to a request for proposals to see if we can't get anyone bidding on that. There's other caveats within the direct negotiation as well, thresholds that need to be considered. So any direct negotiation between 1,000 and 10,000 that's accounted for in the approved budget can be approved by a permanent employee. Again, this is kind of mirroring the thresholds that have already been established. From 10,000 to 50,000 under direct negotiation, and it can be accounted for in the approved budget and funding grant. can be approved by the GM or the designate, and greater than 50,000 but not within the approved budget or funding grant must have board approval. So again, just extra checks and balances in place under that category as well. In terms of purchasing administration, basically this section runs down just general guidance on how to process invoices, and buyers must be responsible to sign all those invoices approving that purchase. They need to be processed within 30 days of the receipt, and that all the thresholds outlined in the policy exclude applicable taxes, and all efforts made to obtain free quotes. And again, noting that a declined response from a bidder may be considered our response.
Bill has a question.
If you should share, Elizabeth, you use purchase orders?
No, we don't.
No. So you mentioned like having accounts. So would you, at a place where, say, a local hardware store where you got, say, a lot of supplies for campgrounds, would you just have an account open for the month and they go in and sign for it and then kind of get a bill at the end of the month? Or is it every transaction?
Every transaction the staff person would bring back and the invoice, and then the accounting staff take those invoices and compare them against the statement that we receive from that supplier on a monthly basis and match them up. And the staff are required to sign off on the invoice as well as note what the purchase was made for and which department it's to be billed to. So under purchasing mechanisms, we look at emergency purchases, and so these are any purchases that the normal requirements of the policy may put health and safety at risk because an immediate action is required. The proposed policy, what it does is outlines and clearly defines what would be considered an emergency under the policy. And that's defined as any imminent or actual danger to life, health, or safety of an employee or official, an imminent or actual danger to life or health or safety of the public due to a flood, spill, pollutant, fire, etc. An unexpected or serious failure of a flood or erosion control structure owned by KCCA, an interruption of an essential service, or imminent or actual danger to KCCA property. And again, what we're looking at here is that an emergency must be determined by the GM, the Director of Operations, or the Health and Safety Representative in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair. So it's a combination of those people coming together, identifying the emergency, and that they're enacting this part of the policy for one of those defined reasons. The other thing is that an expenditure over $10,000 that's outside of the approved budget would be reported to the board in a timely manner. So basically at the next board meeting there would be a report that would say we enacted the emergency section of the policy for this reason and this was the expenditure. The vendor of record is somewhat of a new section within this new policy. It was mentioned within the existing policy, but I think it more clearly outlines what the goal would be here. More and more we have difficulty getting free quotes from local suppliers because they feel like there's a lot of time that goes into putting those quotes together, whether it's visiting the site, getting the pricing. And where they're getting frustrated is they realize that we're a public agency and we need to go through that process, but they might not win the bid and they've put in all that time and energy into it. Really where we've seen that within the past couple of years is excavating services, gravel, road type of work, where it's getting harder and harder to get those companies out to actually get bids because they fear they're not going to get it. So what a vendor of record list would allow us to do is in accordance with thresholds for a term not to exceed 4 years for recurring services on a non-exclusive basis. So we would go basically out one time, ask for bids on, again, using excavating services as an example, go out and invite bids in that, from those categories to be put on a vendor of record list. And then when the guys need some excavating work down out in the campground, they would simply go to their vendor of record list and get one of those companies to come in and perform the work, rather than having to go out and do 3 bids on a more regular basis. These types of services would not exceed $100,000 annually. A call of interest would establish the terms, including the price per unit that we're looking for. And it wouldn't prevent KCCA from undertaking a purchasing process to obtain similar goods or services that the preferred vendor could participate in that. So despite the fact that we have a vendor of service for excavating, if we are going to undertake a large project like the driveway, that wouldn't prevent us from going out and doing a separate RFP on that. And likewise, it wouldn't prevent that vendor of record person from bidding on that separate project as well. And that the final selection shall be based on price, quality, and timing. The stewardship services and tree planting, this is another very specialized service that the authority has. Annually, staff will go out and review the pricing from a list of preferred service providers, and then consider the pricing, quality, and availability when placing those orders. Purchases from employees. Purchases from employees may be allowed. Oh, sorry.
With regard to the stewardship services, tree planting, is that tree supplies or is tree planting?
No, it basically refers to the acquiring of the tree stock.
That's right.
So
that's
the
what I'm
seedlings,
referring
not
to.
anything like shovels or anything else that they would be using.
But it's tree planting there, shouldn't it be tree supplies?
In the policy, it refers to tree planting program, but I can
Okay.
make that change.
Okay, but it's just, it was a little unclear.
Purchases from employees may be allowed if approved by the general manager or director of operations, but there's certain circumstances where it would not be approved. And those are circumstances where it would detract from the ability to carry out normal duties. The contract is similar to the employee's normal duties, or it can be reasonably assumed that the employee had knowledge that would be an unfair advantage to them getting that. Purchases by employees, so this is employees purchasing items for personal use, would not be allowed. The next section is on purchasing limits and buyers, and again, just clearly outlines the approval levels for each staff category at the authority. So the general manager and director of operations have approval limits $10,000 and greater. The permanent staff, including contract staff approved by the general manager and director of operations, would be allowed to make purchases under $10,000. And all other buyers, 1 year or less contract staff and seasonal staff, would be, again, with the approval of GM or DO, to make purchases under $1,000. I think the real benefit of the new proposed policy is that it goes into greater detail on the actual processes for public tender and requests for proposals. Again, these processes would be required for all purchases over $75,000. And it goes into great detail in terms of definition, explaining what the evaluation committee would be comprised of, and includes a chart in terms of irregularities and the response that the authority would take based on those. So, you know, what do you do when you get a late bid? It would be an automatic rejection and returned unopened. If the signature was missing on the binding or authorization of a proposed bid, the chart's proposed response is that you would provide the bidder 2 business days to correct and initial that mistake and resubmit. So So it gives staff much more guidance in terms of walking through that whole process. The other new element that's included in this proposed policy is outlining when a bid or a bond security would be required. And based on the nature of the good or service, a bid or security may be deemed beneficial, and a performance bond and labor and material bond are required for all construction projects exceeding $100,000. It also establishes a complaint mechanism, so complaints should be first directed to the general manager, and if unresolved or unsatisfied, the vendor or unsuccessful bidder may seek a delegation with the board of directors. The other thing that this policy includes is a fairly comprehensive definitions as well, which is again included to guide staff as well as the public and the board of directors in terms of the terminology used in the policy as well. So I would welcome any suggested changes, comments on the policy, but it would be, again, the intention to address any concerns that you might have and bring it to the October full authority for consideration.
Are there any questions or concerns, suggestions? Thought it was pretty comprehensive going through it. I think it nails things down much clearer. So everybody knows exactly what the policies are. So if there's no further questions, then I guess I'll move and seconder for the recommendation that this go to the full authority. Bob? Ian? Anything else? All in favor? And that's carried.
If I may,
Sir?
I'd like to apologize for my late arrival and scruffy appearance, but I had another meeting that ran over considerably, and I had no choice but to stay there until it concluded. So, as I say, my apologies. Hope I haven't held you up too much.
That's the next is budget. Plus the rest of it is just more detailed on the policy, right?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chair, the next report is looking at 2019 budget considerations, and basically to inform the committee as well as the board on salary and benefit considerations specifically for the 2019 draft budget. If you remember, this is the final year of our four-year budget process, which was designed to build capacity in terms of phasing in the full-time position of the GIS IT supervisor. Some things to consider as we approach and work through the 2019 budget. This budget is unique in that it's mainly developed with this existing board of directors, but as you all know, the municipal election is approaching, and it will be the new board that will actually finalize this budget and approve it in February. So on that, I think I mentioned in the advanced package, and it's been mentioned at the board as well, that I fully expect, based on the outcomes of the election, we'll meet again in November. The current members, their term ends usually at the end of November. So you have that final meeting in November. And December, in election years, we usually don't meet as a board based on the outcomes of the elections, and use that as a training for any new members coming in, and then start in January with the new board. So 2019 is unique as we work through that process and continue to build the budget as well. The 2019 draft budget that I am preparing, I'm suggesting that we look at a 2% cost of living increase to all the salary ranges, and that can be accommodated within the proposed 7% increase that has been part of our four-year budget process. There's a couple of things that we have to consider in terms of pressures for salaries and benefits moving forward. In terms of salaries, it is recommended that a 2% cost of living be used. The CPI for the period of April 2017 to April 2018 is 2.1%. However, it has been as high this summer as 3.1%, but I think 2% is pretty standard across the board from what I'm seeing other boards and commissions looking at for 2019. Benefit considerations, a big pressure coming forward in 2019 and looking over the next 4 to 5 year horizon will be an increase in the Canada Pension Plan. The CPP starting in 2019 will be gradually enhanced over the next 7 years. And once fully in place, the enhancement will increase the maximum CPP retirement benefit by about 50%. And so the reality of that in 2019 is we're looking at an increase of 5.1% and the upper earning limit increasing to $59,700, which in terms for this board is about a $5,700 increase in benefits just for that one benefit for our staffing. So again, looking for the next 4-year budget cycle, that will be an ongoing pressure as we work for that increase up until 2025 when the upper limit is at $82,700. OMERS hasn't weighed, I don't have a definitive answer on OMERS yet. And so that possibly might be an added pressure, but I don't expect it to be at this time. So those are the real pressures in terms of staffing and budget, but again, everything can be accommodated within that 7% increase. In terms of staffing levels for 2019, again, our major focus over the last 4 years is keeping the GIS IT supervisor on as a permanent full-time position. And you'll see, again, this year coming through the departmental budget reports is that ongoing request from the current staff to have some of the backup resource staff underneath them and the ability of staff to look for funding for that. I think we're in a good position going into 2019. Again, we're not looking at those support positions weighing in on the municipal levy, but looking at funding as well as that wage subsidy reserve to support those positions. I do have a request out right now to the Environmental Trust to possibly look at supporting helping to support one of those resource positions over the next little bit. So I'll be working on kind of a joint proposal with them as well as bringing that back to the board at a future date. Again, no impact to the municipal levy, but looking at different funding pots, including the Environmental Trust, to support some of those resource positions. And that'll be finalized towards the end of the year, and I'll bring that back once I have a definitive plan in place.
Any questions on this?
Speaking of the mouthful, so what we're talking about, if I got this correctly here, is a 2% COLA plus a 7%?
No, sorry. So the 2% COLA was to add that 2% into the budget as a cost increase. The 7% refers to the actual levy increase that's necessary to support that.
So, which is the same as it was a year ago.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
We've looked at it, and mainly that 4-year. So it was in 2016, it was a 6% increase, and then it's been 7% every year after that.
Thank you.
And that budgeting was a direct result of the city of London wanting a a multi-year plan.
That's correct. So this past term of the City of London Council recommended looking at 4-year budget plans. And as a result, we followed suit with that plan.
No?
I'd like to make a motion to move the recommendation.
May I have a second? Rob? This is basically for staff to proceed and prepare a budget based on this.
Yes.
Any further questions? All in favor? That's carried. Great. And I guess from there we need to move into in-camera.
That's correct.
So I need a motion to move into in-camera. Ralph, Ian, all in favor? That's carried. Okay, matters arising out of our in-camera. There's some recommendations made in closed session that the reports go forward to the full authority at their next meeting. And a mover and a seconder, Ralph, Ian, all in favor? That's carried. And I think that's all we need out of that.
It is.
So we just need adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Bill?
Sure.
Ralph? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, everybody.